Hello, dear viewers. Welcome back to the Liturgy of Slaves. Before we dive into tonight's story, I want to take a moment to thank you, truly, for your continued support. It means more than you know. If this tale stirs something in you, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. Now, let's dim the lights, settle in, and step into tonight's chilling account. With the matriarch said, "We don't speak of the twins. Now at last, I understand why." E2. My grandmother's house had always felt like it existed slightly outside the rest of the world. Tucked at the end of a twisting dirt road, deep in rural Vermont, swallowed on all sides by a dense forest of ancient maple trees, the Victorian mansion rose 3 imposing stories high, its weathered clapboard siding and steep gabled roof cutting a dark silhouette against the sky. I spent every summer of my childhood there. I explored its countless rooms, discovered hidden corners, and wandered the sprawling gardens my grandmother tended with almost religious devotion. But there was one room I was never permitted to enter, a locked bedroom at the very end of the 3rd-floor hallway. Whenever I dared to ask about it, my grandmother would press her lips into a thin, tight line and slowly shake her head. "We don't speak of that," she would whisper, her voice dropping so low it barely reached my ears. "Some doors are meant to stay closed." Of course, being the curious child I was, those words only made me more desperate to uncover whatever lay behind it. During thunderstorms, I'd press my ear against the heavy oak door, convinced I could hear the faint, ghostly sound of children's laughter drifting from within. Once, I even tried to peek through the keyhole. But something had been pressed inside it, blocking my view entirely. When I finally worked up the courage to ask my mother, her face went pale. "We don't speak of the twins," she said sharply, and then changed the subject without another word. It was the only time I had ever heard anyone in our family mention twins, and the memory of those words, that cold, clipped dismissal, lingered in the back of my mind for years. After college, I moved away, chasing a career, chasing a life. Visits to my grandmother's house grew less and less frequent. Life has a way of rushing forward, pulling you along in its current until the mysteries of childhood slowly fade into the background. But when my grandmother passed away last month at the remarkable age of 97, I found myself driving back down that familiar dirt road, watching the dense canopy of trees close in overhead like a closing fist. The funeral was a small, quiet affair. My grandmother had outlived most of the people she had ever loved, and our family had always been small. My mother, my Aunt Catherine, a handful of distant relatives I barely recognized. My grandmother had been the matriarch, the pillar holding our fragmented family together. Without her, we were like satellites slowly drifting apart. Afterward, we gathered at the old house. It felt smaller somehow, diminished by her absence, as though her presence had been the thing filling all those rooms. I wandered through the hallways, trailing my fingers across dusty, antique furniture and faded photographs that watched me from the walls. My mother found me in the library, staring up at a portrait of my grandmother as a young woman. Her face unlined, her eyes bright with a youth and promise that felt heartbreaking now. "She left the house to you," my mother said quietly, holding out a thick envelope. Along with this, I took it from her hand. It was heavy, sealed with wax pressed with my grandmother's signet ring, an intricate design of intertwining roses. Inside was a key, old, brass, and ornate, and a letter written in my grandmother's precise, careful handwriting. "To my dearest Eliza, if you are reading this, then I have passed from this world. The house is yours now, along with all its secrets. I have carried this burden for far too long, and I cannot take it with me to my grave. The The key enclosed will open the locked room on the 3rd floor. What you find there may disturb you deeply, but I believe you deserve to know the truth about our family. The twins were born in the summer of 1952. Your grandfather and I were overjoyed. Twins had not been born in our family for generations, but that joy turned to despair very quickly. There was something wrong with them from the very beginning. Something I still cannot bring myself to describe, even now. We did what we thought was best at the time. Perhaps it was wrong. Perhaps we should have sought help, but fear and shame can drive people to terrible decisions. And I have preserved their room exactly as it was. Some might call it morbid, but I could never bring myself to erase them completely. They were still my children. Forgive me, Eliza. And please, be careful. Some doors once opened cannot be closed again. With eternal love, a grandmother, who I read the letter 3 times, my hands trembling more with each pass. The key felt unnaturally cold against my palm, as if it had been kept somewhere without sunlight for decades, which I supposed it had. My mother stood in the doorway watching me. "What does it say?" she asked softly. I hesitated. Then I folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. "Nothing important," I lied. "Just some instructions about the house. See to." That night, after everyone had left and the house had settled into its familiar creaks and groans, I stood at the foot of the staircase leading to the 3rd floor. The key weighed heavy in my pocket. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to honor my grandmother's lifetime of silence. But curiosity has always been my downfall. The 3rd floor hallway was dark, the only light a pale silver thread from a small window at the end. The floorboards protested beneath my feet as I moved down the corridor, past dusty paintings and forgotten furniture draped in white sheets like standing ghosts. When I finally reached the locked door, I paused. My hand hovered over the knob. Was I truly ready for this? To uncover a family secret buried for over 70 years? Before I could talk myself out of it, I slid the key into the lock. It turned with surprising ease, as though it had been regularly oiled and maintained, patiently waiting for this very moment. The door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a room bathed in cold silver moonlight. It was a nursery, preserved as though frozen in time. 2 identical cribs stood side by side against the far wall, their white paint yellowed with age. A rocking chair sat in the corner, a hand-knitted blanket draped over its arm. Toys, wooden blocks, cloth dolls, tin soldiers, were arranged neatly on shelves and tables, waiting for hands that would never reach for them again. The air inside was stale but not unpleasant, carrying the faint ghost of lavender and something else I couldn't quite name. I stepped inside, half expecting to hear that laughter I had imagined as a child. But the room held its silence. It held its secrets close. On a dresser between the 2 cribs stood a silver, framed photograph. I picked it up and wiped away a thin layer of dust with my thumb. It showed my grandmother, much younger, holding 2 infants wrapped in identical blankets. She was smiling, but even in the faded image, I could see the strain around her eyes, the tension she couldn't quite hide. The cribs were empty, save for 2 small handmade quilts, each embroidered with a name. Theodore. Theodora. I ran my fingers across the stitching, feeling a strange and aching connection to these unknown relatives who shared my blood, but never my time. Then something caught my eye. A journal, resting on the nightstand beside the rocking chair. Its leather cover cracked with age, its pages yellowed and brittle. I carefully opened it to the first entry. As June 15, 1952, today I gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The labor was difficult, and at times I feared I would not survive it. But they are here now, and they are perfect. Theodore and Theodora, my beautiful children. The handwriting was my grandmother's, though shakier than the precise script I knew. I turned the page. As June 20th, 1952, something is wrong with the twins. They cry constantly, but not like normal babies. It's more like screaming. The doctor says it's colic, that it will pass. But there is something in their eyes when they look at me. Something knowing. It frightens me, though I'm ashamed to admit it. Is June 25th, 1952. They've stopped crying. Now they simply stare, following me with their eyes as I move around the nursery. They don't sleep when they should. Instead, they lie awake in their cribs watching. Always watching. The nurse quit today. She said she couldn't stand the way they looked at her. Harold thinks I'm being hysterical. But he hasn't been the one caring for them, day and night. I turned the pages slowly, each entry more disturbing than the last. My grandmother described how the twins developed at an alarming rate. Sitting up, speaking their first words at only 3 months old. How they would whisper to each other in a language no one else could understand. How pets and small animals near the house began to disappear, only for the twins to be found later, playing with bones and fur. September 3rd, 1952. Though I caught Theodora standing over Theodore's crib last night, pressing a pillow over his face. When I screamed, she turned and looked at me, with such hatred in her eyes. She is only 3 months old. It is impossible. And yet, as September 10th, 1952, if Harold wants to take them to specialists in Boston. I agreed. But secretly, I am terrified of what the doctors might find. What if they take my babies away? Despite everything, they're still my children. I still love them. God help me, I do. September 15th, 1952. The doctors found nothing physically wrong. They said their development is advanced but not concerning. Harold was relieved. But I know better. I've seen what they do when they think no one is watching. The way they communicate without speaking. The way small animals die in their presence. There is something inside them. Something not right. Something not human. The entries continued, growing more frantic, more desperate. My grandmother described strange occurrences filling the house. Objects moving on their own, voices whispering from empty rooms, shadows drifting against the light. And always, at the center of it all, the twins, watching with their identical dark eyes. November 28th, 1952, Harold doesn't believe me. He says I'm suffering from some kind of postpartum psychosis. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am losing my mind. But I know what I saw last night. I know what I heard. I was woken by singing. A woman's voice, soft and sweet, drifting from the nursery. When I went to investigate, I found the twins standing in their cribs, holding hands through the bars, their eyes closed. The singing was coming from somewhere above them, but there was no one else in the room. When they sensed my presence, they opened their eyes in unison. "Grandmother is coming," they said together. "She wants to play with us." My grandmother has been dead for 12 years. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely turn the pages. The next entry was dated nearly a month later. The handwriting almost unrecognizable, jagged and desperate, as though written in a blind panic. December 24th, 1952. If Harold is dead, they killed him. I know they did, though the police are calling it an accident. He fell down the stairs. They say he broke his neck. But I heard them giggling afterward. I heard them say, "One down." Says I can't stay here. I can't leave them alone. They're my children, my responsibility. God forgive me for what I'm about to do. The next entry was the last. December 25th, 1952. It's done. May God have mercy on my soul. I closed the journal, my mind reeling. What had my grandmother done? What had happened to the twins? If they had died, why weren't they buried in the family plot beside my grandfather? I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to look for them. The attic had always been off limits when I was a child. Another forbidden space in a house built on secrets. The narrow staircase leading to it was hidden behind a panel in the hallway closet, designed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding wall. I found it without thinking. Some memories never fade, no matter how many years pass. The stairs groaned under my weight as I ascended, the beam of my flashlight cutting through decades of dust and cobwebs. The attic was vast, running the entire length of the house, its ceiling following the steep pitch of the roof. Trunks and boxes were stacked in neat rows, each labeled in my grandmother's handwriting, of Christmas decorations 1960s, Harold's clothes, family photographs pre-1950. I moved deeper, scanning labels, until I found the one I was looking for. A trunk marked simply TNT, 1952. The trunk was locked, but the key from my grandmother's letter fit perfectly. Inside, I found more journals, medical records, a stack of photographs bound with twine. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor and began to read. The medical records were from a private sanitarium in Switzerland. Admission forms for 2 children, Theodore and Theodora Montgomery, dated January 3, 1953. The diagnosis listed for both: severe psychopathy with homicidal tendencies. Treatment notes spanned years. Various therapies, various medications, all apparently ineffective. The final entry, dated December 1960, stated simply, "Patients deceased following unsuccessful experimental treatment." I set the records aside and untied the photographs. They showed the twins at various ages, as infants, as toddlers, and finally as children of about 8 or 9. In the earliest photos, they looked like normal babies, chubby, cheeked and innocent. But in the later images, there was something undeniably disturbing about them, nothing I could point to exactly. Their features were symmetrical, their smiles appropriate. But their eyes were utterly empty, like looking down into a deep well and seeing nothing reflected back. The last photograph showed them standing side by side in what appeared to be a hospital room, dressed in matching white gowns, holding hands, their faces expressionless. Written on the back in my grandmother's handwriting, the last photograph: "May they find peace." My grandmother had sent her own children away, had institutionalized them for 8 years before some experimental treatment killed them. It seemed unthinkable. Yet the evidence was right in front of me. I was about to close the trunk when I noticed something else at the very bottom. A small leather-bound book, different from the journals. Older, its cover worn smooth from years of handling. When I opened it, I realized it wasn't a book at all, but a collection of newspaper clippings, carefully preserved between tissue, thin pages. The clippings dated back to the early 1900s, each documenting a similar story: twins born to the women in my family, followed by unexplained deaths, mysterious illnesses, or the twins themselves disappearing under suspicious circumstances. The pattern repeated again and again, generation after generation. Always twins, always tragedy. The final clipping was from a local newspaper dated December 26, 1952, my grandfather's obituary. It mentioned his surviving wife and infant twins. But there was no mention of my mother, who would have been 5 years old at the time. I searched the other journals for any mention of her and found a single entry, dated 1950. "Margaret turns 3 today. She is such a joy, normal, healthy, everything a child should be. I thank God every day that she wasn't born a twin. Perhaps the curse has skipped a generation." A curse. What was my grandmother talking about? And if my mother was 5 when the twins were born, why had she never once mentioned having siblings? I needed to talk to her. Now, too, I gathered the journals and photographs, stuffing them into a canvas bag hanging from a nearby hook. As I turned to leave, my flashlight beam swept across the far corner of the attic. and caught something that didn't belong among the trunks and forgotten furniture. A door. Small, barely 4 feet high, set into the sloped ceiling. It looked newer than the surrounding architecture. The wood less weathered, the hinges less rusted, no lock. Just a simple latch holding it closed. Common sense told me to leave it alone, to take what I'd found and get out of the attic. But I had come too far to stop now. I approached the door and lifted the latch. The space beyond was dark, the air noticeably colder than the rest of the attic. My flashlight revealed a small room with a sharply angled ceiling, empty except for 2 rocking chairs positioned facing each other in the center. Child-sized. Painted white, with faded pink cushions tied to the seats. As my light swept across the room, I noticed the walls, the floor, the ceiling, covered entirely in markings. They formed an intricate, shifting pattern that seemed to move in the beam of my flashlight. Not any language I recognized, but they gave me a feeling of profound wrongness, as though they were words that human mouths were never meant to speak. A sudden noise behind me made me spin around, heart slamming against my ribs. The door had swung shut. There was no breeze in the attic, nothing that could account for it. I lunged for the handle. It wouldn't move, as if held closed by something invisible. I threw my shoulder against the door once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th attempt, it gave way suddenly, sending me sprawling across the attic floor. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the main staircase, gasping for breath. 2. I found my mother in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea growing cold between her hands. She looked up when I walked in, and her eyes immediately widened at the sight of the canvas bag clutched in my white, knuckled grip. "You've been in the attic," she said. Not a question. I dumped the contents onto the table. The journals, the medical records, the photographs. "Oh, tell me about the twins," I said, my voice shaking. "Tell me what happened to Theodore and Theodora." My mother's face drained of color. For a moment, I thought she might faint. Then she drew a slow, steadying breath and gestured for me to sit. "I was 5 when they were born," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I remember being so excited to have a brother and sister, but from the beginning, there was something wrong with them. They didn't cry like normal babies. They just stared, watching everything, everyone. Mother became obsessed with them, convinced they were somehow evil. Father didn't believe her. He thought she was having some kind of breakdown. He wanted to get her help, but she refused to leave the twins alone with anyone. She was afraid of what they might do. She picked up one of the photographs, her finger tracing the outline of their faces. "And then he died," I said softly. My mother nodded. "They said it was an accident, that he'd tripped and fallen down the stairs in the middle of the night." But I was awake. I heard them laughing afterward. Theodore and Theodora, laughing in their cribs. They were only 6 months old. A chill moved through me like cold water. Mother took them away just after Christmas. She told everyone they had died of pneumonia, but she sent them to some private hospital in Europe. I didn't find out where until years later, when I came across some of her correspondence. By then, they really were dead. Some experimental treatment had gone wrong, or so the hospital claimed. She paused, her eyes distant. "And the nursery on the 3rd floor. Mother preserved it exactly as it was the day she took them away. She would go in sometimes, just to sit. She never allowed anyone else inside." She closed her eyes briefly. I think she felt guilty. Despite everything, they were still her children. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in me since I'd first opened those journals. "Do you believe they were evil, actually evil?" My mother was silent for a long moment, her fingers still resting on the photograph. "I believe," she said finally, "that there are things in this world we can't explain. Things beyond our understanding. The twins were something else, something not quite human. Sieve, the journals mentioned a curse." I pressed. "Something about twins in our family." She sighed deeply and heavily, like someone setting down a weight they've carried for decades. "It's an old family legend. Every few generations, twins are born to the women in our line. And those twins are never right. They bring death and destruction. The only way to end the cycle is to—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "To kill them," I supplied, my voice hollow. She nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "Your grandmother couldn't do it. She couldn't kill her own children, no matter what they were. So she sent them away instead. But the guilt ate at her for the rest of her life." We sat together in silence, the weight of it pressing down on us like something physical. Then my mother reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm. "Urgent. You need to leave this house, Eliza. Sell it. Burn it to the ground. I don't care. But don't stay here. The twins, their influence lingers. I've felt it all my life. Like a shadow at the edge of my vision. Promise me you won't stay." See, I promised. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew I wouldn't keep them. That night I dreamed of the twins. They stood at the foot of my bed, holding hands, their faces perfectly blank. "Play with us, Eliza," they said in unison, their voices neither male nor female, neither child nor adult. "Grandmother is waiting." I woke with a gasp, my nightgown soaked with sweat. The bedroom was dark, but I could have sworn I saw two small figures retreating through the doorway, hand in hand, dissolving into the darkness of the hall. My mother left early the next morning, citing urgent business back in the city. I didn't try to stop her. In truth, I was relieved to have the house to myself. To continue searching without her worried glances and quiet warnings following me from room to room. I spent the day combing through the remaining trunks in the attic. I found birth and death certificates for generations of twins dating back to the 1800s, all following the same relentless pattern. Twins born, tragedy following close behind, the twins themselves dying young or simply vanishing. But it was in a hidden compartment in my grandmother's desk that I found the most disturbing evidence yet. A small leather-bound volume, titled The Montgomery Family Grimoire. The book was handwritten in multiple styles, passed down through generations, added to by different hands across different centuries. Its pages contained rituals, spells, incantations, many focused on protection against malevolent spirits. One passage stopped me cold. "The twin curse has plagued the women of our line since Abigail Montgomery made her pact with the entity in 1723. Every third generation, twin children are born who serve as vessels for this entity's influence in our world. They appear human, but are not. They wear the faces of innocence, but harbor ancient malice. The only true protection is to end their existence before they can fully manifest their powers, preferably before their first birthday. If this cannot be done, they must be bound using the ritual of containment, though this is a temporary measure at best. The entity cannot be destroyed, only delayed." The book went on to describe the ritual of containment in exhausting detail. A complex ceremony involving symbols drawn in precise patterns, incantations spoken at exact intervals, herbs and minerals arranged in a protective circle. The goal was to bind the entity to a specific location, preventing its influence from spreading beyond those boundaries. With a growing sense of dread, I realized the symbols I had seen in the small room behind the attic door matched those described in the grimoire exactly. My grandmother had performed the ritual. She had bound whatever malevolent force inhabited the twins to that tiny, airless space. But according to the grimoire, such bindings were temporary, requiring renewal every 25 years. My grandmother had died just over a month ago. The binding was weakening. As if to confirm my fears, the house began to change around me. Doors I was certain I had closed stood open when I returned to them. Objects vanished, only to reappear in strange places. At night, I heard footsteps in the hallway, the creak of rocking chairs, childish whispers drifting just beneath the threshold of hearing. I told myself it was my imagination, lack of sleep, the weight of everything I'd uncovered pressing down on an exhausted mind. But deep down, I knew better. Something was waking up inside this house, something that had been bound and contained for decades. And it was stretching, slowly, toward the edges of its prison. I needed to perform the ritual again, strengthen the binding before whatever was trapped in that attic room broke free completely. But the grimoire warned that the ritual was dangerous for the uninitiated, potentially fatal if performed incorrectly. I needed help, too. My Aunt Catherine had always been the black sheep of our family, estranged from my grandmother, for reasons no one had ever explained. She lived in a small cottage on the outskirts of town, surrounded by gardens full of herbs and plants that most people would simply call weeds. Local children called her a witch, though never to her face. There were rumors that she practiced the old ways, whatever that meant. I had always been fond of her. She had a warmth my grandmother lacked, a genuine interest in the people around her. If anyone would know about family curses and binding rituals, it was Aunt Catherine. I found her in her garden, kneeling among rows of plants I couldn't name, her gray hair pulled back in a loose braid. She didn't seem surprised to see me at all. "I've been expecting you," she said, rising to her feet with a grace that surprised me for a woman of 70. "Come inside. We have much to discuss." Sir, her cottage was exactly as I remembered it from childhood. Cozy and cluttered, smelling of herbs and wood smoke. Books covered every available surface. Bundles of dried plants hung from the ceiling beams. Crystals caught the light streaming through the windows. She led me to a small table and sat across from me without preamble. "You found the grimoire," she said. And you've been in the binding room." Sai nodded, not even bothering to ask how she knew. "The twins," I began. "We're never twins at all," she finished. "At least not in the way you're thinking." She rose and retrieved a wooden box from a cabinet in the corner, inlaid with mother of pearl, worn from use. From inside, she removed a stack of yellowed photographs and spread them carefully across the table between us. "These are the twins from each generation," she explained. "Look closely," said I, leaned in, studying the images. Each showed a pair of children, a boy and a girl, at various ages, across different decades, in different clothing, different faces, different times, and yet, something eerily, unmistakably similar in all of them. Something in the eyes, in the expressionless set of their mouths. They look related," I said carefully. They look identical," Catherine corrected. "Not to each other, but across generations. The Theodore from 1952 looks exactly like the Thomas from 1903, who looks exactly like the Timothy from 1854. The girls the same. Because they're not different children. They're the same entity, born again and again into our family, wearing slightly different faces, carrying the same ancient essence." So I shook my head, struggling to absorb what she was saying. "That's impossible." "Is it?" She tapped one of the photographs. "My grandmother's twins, around 5 years old. Look at their eyes. Really look." So I did, and felt the cold move through me. There was something ancient in those childish eyes, something that had watched centuries rise and fall, something patient, calculating, utterly inhuman. What are they? I whispered. We don't know. Not truly. Catherine's voice was quiet. The Grimoire calls it an entity. But that's just a word for something we don't have the language to understand. It made a pact with Abigail Montgomery in 1723. Power and prosperity for the family in exchange for allowing it to incarnate every third generation. Abigail agreed, not understanding what she was trading away. By the time she understood her mistake, it was far too late. And my grandmother, the ritual she performed. Elizabeth was always the strongest of us, Catherine said. When her twins began showing their true nature, she researched the old ways, found the binding ritual. She couldn't bring herself to kill them. They wore the faces of her children, after all. So she bound the entity to that room in the attic instead, contained it. But the binding is weakening, I said. I can feel it, said Catherine, nodded gravely. The ritual must be renewed every quarter century, or upon the death of the one who performed it. Whichever comes first. Elizabeth is gone, the binding is failing. Then we have to perform it again, I said with more confidence than I truly felt. It's not that simple, Eliza. The ritual requires blood from a direct descendant of the twins. Elizabeth used her own blood as their mother, but you. I'm not a direct descendant, I realized. My mother is, and Margaret would never participate. She spent her entire life running from this family's legacy. That leaves only one option. Catherine met my gaze steadily. I am Elizabeth's younger sister. We share the same blood. I can perform the ritual. She paused. But I'll need your help. It's dangerous, Eliza. If something goes wrong, what choice do we have? I interrupted quietly. If we do nothing, whatever is in that room will break free completely. Catherine held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. We'll need to prepare. The ritual must be performed at midnight, when the veil between worlds is thinnest, and we'll need supplies. She stood and began pulling books from shelves, jars from cabinets, moving with quiet, practiced purpose. Take these, she said, handing me a handwritten list. Go to the old apothecary on Maple Street. Ask for Mr. Chen. Tell him I sent you. I spent the afternoon gathering everything on the list. Rare herbs, specific minerals, candles made from beeswax and animal fat. Mr. Chen asked no questions as he wrapped each item with careful, deliberate hands, though his eyes held a quiet, knowing sadness when I mentioned my aunt's name. By the time I returned to my grandmother's house. My house, I reminded myself. The sun was sinking below the tree line, staining the sky a deep and troubled red. The old mansion seemed to loom larger in the fading light, its windows dark like watchful eyes tracking my approach. Inside, something had shifted. The air felt thick, charged, heavy with an energy that made every hair on my arms stand up. As I crossed the foyer, I was almost certain I heard childish laughter echoing from somewhere deep in the house. Aunt Catherine arrived just after sunset, her large leather satchel slung over one shoulder, her expression carved from grim determination. They know what we're planning, she said without greeting. They'll try to stop us? We worked quickly. Catherine mixed herbs in careful proportions, grinding them with a mortar and pestle, while murmuring softly under her breath. I arranged candles in the pattern described in the grimoire. A 5-pointed star within a circle, minerals placed at each point. As midnight drew closer, we made our way to the attic in solemn procession, carrying our supplies like offerings. The house resisted our progress. Doors that should have swung open stuck in their frames. Floorboards creaked in protest beneath our feet. The temperature dropped noticeably as we climbed toward the third floor, our breath becoming visible in the chilled air. The nursery door stood open when we reached it, though I was certain I had closed and locked it after my first visit. Inside, the room appeared undisturbed, the crib standing their silent vigil in the moonlight. But something had changed. A presence. A watchfulness that hadn't been there before. "Shh, don't look at the photograph," Catherine warned quietly as we passed through. "Don't look at anything too closely. Keep your mind focused on the work." The attic stairs felt steeper than I remembered, the darkness at the top more absolute. My flashlight flickered despite fresh batteries. Catherine produced an old-fashioned brass and glass lantern from her satchel, its flame burning with an unnaturally steady light. "Oil blessed by a priest in 1842, she said simply, seeing my expression. "Some things can't be corrupted." The door to the binding room stood wide open, swung like a welcome, like an invitation. Beyond it, the two child-sized rocking chairs were moving, gently, rhythmically, back and forth. Though the attic air was perfectly still, they stopped the instant we crossed the threshold. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the movement had been. "Work quickly," Catherine instructed, setting the lantern on the floor. "Draw the circle exactly as shown in the grimoire. I'll prepare the incantation." Des. I knelt and began sketching the complex pattern on the wooden floor using chalk made from crushed bone and ash. The symbols felt deeply, viscerally wrong, as if they belonged to no human language. Angles that hurt the eye to follow, curves that seemed to bend in impossible directions. As I drew, I could feel resistance, as if the very floor were fighting against each mark. Catherine stood in the center of the room, reciting words from the grimoire in a language I didn't recognize. Her voice rose and fell in strange, unsettling cadences, sometimes dropping to a whisper, sometimes rising to a near shout. The temperature plummeted further, frost crawling across the walls and ceiling despite the warm summer night outside. As I completed the circle, connecting the last line back to the first, a shock ran through my entire body, like grabbing a live wire. The symbols began to glow with a pale, cold blue light, flooding the room more brightly than the lantern. "The candles," Catherine ordered, her voice strained. "Place them at the points of the star, quickly." I scrambled to position the black candles at each intersection of the star within the circle. As I placed the last one, Catherine drew a small silver knife across her palm. Blood welled from the cut and dripped onto the open grimoire she held before her. "With blood of the line I bind thee," she intoned. "With words of power I contain thee. By salt and iron, by silver and ash, I command thee to remain within these bounds until the appointed time." See, the symbols flared. The blue light shifted, deepened, pulsed red. The rocking chairs began to move again, faster and faster, the wood shrieking in protest at the unnatural motion. The temperature fell further still, ice crystals forming in the very air around us. And then came the voices, childish voices, ancient voices, speaking from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You cannot bind us forever, daughter of Montgomery. We are eternal. We are patient. We will have what was promised to us." Catherine faltered. Her face had gone pale as bone. I moved to her side, catching her as she swayed. "Finish it," I urged. "We have to finish it." She drew a shaking breath, steadied herself, and turned to the final page of the grimoire. Her eyes went wide. "It's gone," she whispered. "The final incantation. It's been erased." I looked over her shoulder. Where there should have been text, there was nothing. Only a blank space, clean and deliberate, as if the words had been lifted carefully from the page. "How is that possible?" I breathed. The book was locked in my grandmother's desk. "They've been planning this," Catherine realized, horror spreading slowly across her face. All these years, waiting, influencing events from within their prison. They knew Elizabeth would die. They knew the binding would weaken. They've been preparing. The voices came again, louder now, laced with something like triumph. Did you think we were helpless? Did you think we were truly contained? Foolish women, playing with forces you cannot comprehend. The pact cannot be broken. The promise must be fulfilled. See, the symbols on the floor began to dim, the glowing light fading as the binding weakened further. The rocking chairs went suddenly still, and in the silence I heard a new sound. Small footsteps, approaching the door of the binding room. "We need the final words," I said desperately. "Catherine, think. My grandmother must have left something. A contingency, a clue." So Catherine pressed her eyes closed, her brow furrowed in fierce concentration. Then her eyes flew open. "The music box," she said. "In the nursery. The one that plays that eerie lullaby. Elizabeth always kept it wound. I thought it was just sentimentality, but the music boxed. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I turned and ran. 2. The nursery was different when I entered it this time. The air thick and heavy, the shadows deeper and more substantial than any shadow should be. The crib seemed to loom, somehow larger. The toys arranged on the shelves seemed to track me with invisible attention. On the dresser between the cribs stood a delicate porcelain music box, painted with scenes of children playing in a garden. I approached it carefully, half expecting it to vanish before I could reach it, but it held solid and real beneath my trembling fingers as I lifted the lid. A tinkling melody began to play, a lullaby I recognized from my own childhood. The notes slightly off, slightly wrong. Inside the box, nestled on a cushion of faded velvet, was a small piece of paper folded into a tight square. I unfolded it with care, a single sentence in my grandmother's precise handwriting to end what began. "Return them to where they first came." I stared at the words, turning them over in my mind. Return them. Return who? The twins were dead, had been for decades. And where had they first come from? A child's voice spoke directly behind me, so close I felt breath against the back of my neck. She could never do it. She was too weak. "But you're not weak, are you, Eliza?" I spun around. The nursery was empty. The voice came again, from the direction of the cribs. "We've been waiting for you. We knew you would come back to this house eventually. Blood calls to blood." In the crib on the left, a shape was forming, solidifying slowly from the shadows. The outline of a boy, perhaps 8 years old, dark hair, darker eyes. In the second crib, an identical shape. A girl, distinguished only by her longer hair. "Theodora," I whispered. "Theodora." They smiled in unison. The expression never reached their eyes. "We've had many names," they said together. "Many faces, but always the same purpose." What purpose?" I asked, though I already knew the answer was not one I wanted to hear. To collect what is owed," they replied calmly. "A soul from each generation. Payment for the pact Abigail made, prosperity and power, in exchange for us." I backed away slowly, clutching my grandmother's note. "My grandmother bound you," I said. "She found a way to contain you." Their laughter came like breaking glass, temporarily. "But bindings weaken. People die. And we are very, very patient." From somewhere above, I heard Catherine cry out in pain. The ritual was failing. I looked down at the note again. "To end what began. Return them to where they first came." Where had it all begun? The pact. 1723. Abigail Montgomery. The cemetery. I said aloud, the realization breaking over me like cold water. The family mausoleum. Abigail is buried there. The twins' smiles faltered. Their forms flickered, edges blurring, like candle flames in a sudden draft. "You know nothing," they hissed. But I could hear the uncertainty in their voices. I turned and ran. Two outside, the night was unnaturally still. The moon swallowed by clouds that had appeared from nowhere. I sprinted across the overgrown lawn toward the small family cemetery at the edge of the property, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The Montgomery Mausoleum stood at the center, a small neoclassical structure of weathered marble. The door was locked, but my grandmother's key fit this lock too. Inside, stone sarcophagi lined the walls, each engraved with names and dates spanning centuries. At the far end, set apart from the others, stood a plain stone altar. No engravings, no decoration, nothing to indicate its purpose. But as I passed my hand across the center of it, I felt a slight depression, a space that seemed specifically designed for something to rest inside. Behind me, the temperature plummeted. Frost crept up the stone walls. I turned. The twins stood in the doorway. Their forms were more substantial now, more real, more solid, as if the weakening binding had been feeding them. "It won't work," they said flatly. "You don't have the grimoire. You don't have what's needed." I looked at them, at their identical expressions of cold, ancient certainty, and something shifted in me. The final ritual wasn't in the grimoire at all. My grandmother had removed it, hidden it separately, because the grimoire itself was part of the problem, part of the pact Abigail had made. "I don't need the grimoire," I said, and my voice was steady in a way that surprised even me. "I just need to unmake what Abigail did. See," I placed my hand flat on the altar and spoke the words that came to me. Words I somehow knew, in the deepest part of me, were right. "If Eliza Montgomery, descendant of Abigail, do hereby renounce the pact made in 1723. I return what was taken. I reclaim what was given. The debt is paid. The cycle is broken." The twins screamed. It was a sound of pure rage and pure fear, a sound that shook the marble walls of the mausoleum to their foundations. Their forms began to dissolve, edges blurring, features melting into shapeless shadow. "You can't," they shrieked. The price will be too high. I'm willing to pay it," I said clearly. "This ends tonight." A wind tore through the mausoleum from nowhere, swirling, extinguishing the single candle I had brought with me. In the sudden, absolute darkness, I felt the twins' presence weaken. Felt their centuries, old grip on my family, on the women who had suffered and sacrificed and carried this burden through generation after generation, finally begin to let go. A moment of perfect stillness. Then a blinding light filled the mausoleum, so pure and overwhelming I had to shield my eyes and turn away. When it faded, the twins were gone. In their place stood a woman in clothing from another century, her face bearing a resemblance to my own that made my breath catch. "Abigail," I whispered. She nodded, a sad, exhausted smile on her lips. "Psst. You've done what I could not," she said, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "You've ended it. The debt is paid. What was the price?" I asked. "They said there would be a price." "Prosperity," she replied simply. "The wealth, the success, the privilege your family has enjoyed for generations. It's gone now. You'll be ordinary, Eliza. Just ordinary people, living ordinary lives. No special talents born of dark favor. No inexplicable luck. No advantages you didn't earn." So I thought about the Montgomery fortune, the generations of inherited privilege, the advantages I had grown up taking for granted. Then I thought about the twins, about the malevolence that had moved through my family like a shadow, about the lives broken, the souls worn down, the women who had whispered warnings to their daughters and locked doors they could never explain. "It's worth it," I said. Abigail smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes, one that carried in it something like peace. I thought you would say that. You're stronger than I was. Stronger than any of us." She began to fade, her form growing transparent. "The house will go too," she warned. It was part of the bargain. Take what you need and leave before dawn. See, and then she was gone, and I was alone in the dark mausoleum, the cold marble silent around me. I made my way back to the house and found Catherine in the kitchen, both hands wrapped around a mug of tea, still trembling. She looked up when I came through the door, and the relief that crossed her face was like watching a storm break. "They're gone," she said. Not a question, a recognition. I felt it, like a weight lifting, like a shadow finally passing. "What did you do?" I told her everything. The mausoleum, the altar, the words I had spoken, Abigail's appearance, her warning about the house. Catherine listened without interrupting, nodding slowly as she did, the way someone nods when pieces they've been holding for a long time finally, at last, fall into place. "So it's over," she said when I finished. "Truly over. After all these generations."
"Sif, but at a cost," I reminded her gently. "The fortune, the house."
"Everything," says she laughed. A sound of such genuine, unguarded joy that it seemed to transform the whole kitchen, chase the shadows from its corners. "A small price for freedom," she said. "Don't you think? Besides, there are far worse things than being ordinary." Say she rose, suddenly energetic, her earlier exhaustion evaporated. "Shh, we should pack what we can. If Abigail said the house will go, I believe her." We spent the rest of that night gathering what mattered. Family photographs, personal mementos, things of sentimental value, not monetary. The journals and records about the twins we burned in the fireplace, one by one, watching as centuries of darkness curled and blackened and turned to ash. As dawn approached, we loaded Catherine's car and took one last look at the house. In the early morning light, it already seemed smaller, diminished. Just an old house slowly returning to the earth that had always been waiting to reclaim it. We drove away as the sun crested the horizon, casting long gold shadows across the winding dirt road. In the rearview mirror, I watched the house. It seemed to waver in the light, the way heat makes distant things shimmer and dissolve. Then, between one blink and the next, it was simply gone, replaced by an empty clearing, as if the Montgomery mansion had never existed at all.
"Eve,
"Where will you go?" Catherine asked softly as we reached the main road. I hadn't thought that far ahead. My old life in the city felt like a dream belonging to someone else. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Somewhere new, somewhere without ghosts." She smiled, her eyes on the road ahead. "That sounds perfect." We drove in comfortable silence, the miles unwinding behind us, carrying us away from a legacy of darkness and toward something new, something quiet, something ordinary, and therefore precious. I don't know what the future holds for me now. Without the Montgomery fortune, I'll need to make my own way in the world, relying on my own effort, my own choices, my own hands. The thought is both terrifying and, strangely, exhilarating. But I know this: I will never have to look into the eyes of my own children and see something ancient and malevolent staring back. I will never have to lock a door and refuse to explain why. I will never have to whisper those words, cold and clipped and loaded with dread. We don't speak of the twins. The curse is broken. The cycle is ended. And that, I am certain, is worth any price. Thank you for joining me for tonight's tale. If this story stirred something in you, if it kept you from sleep or made you glance toward the shadows, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and sharing with those who appreciate the darker corners of the world.